Welcome to Friday Forum. My name is Leslie Johnson. I am one of the producers of today's program. For more than 100 years now, City Club of Portland is where civic-minded people have come together to find solutions to our region's biggest challenges. Today, we are a diverse network of people who are eager to learn, connect, and share ideas for a better Oregon. Thank you for joining us at the Sentinel Hilton in downtown Portland, where thousands of people are joining us online, on the radio, and on TV. Live viewers are watching on KGW's website, Facebook feed, and news app. Our radio audience is listening via X-ray FM stations, 107.1 FM and 91.1 FM, and TV viewers will watch today's program via Open Signal's community media television stations. We are incredibly grateful for the support of our media partners in bringing City Club forums to our community at large. In addition to City Club's valued media partners, our volunteers and staff enable us to put on Oregon's best civic programs week after week. I'd especially like to recognize the Oregon State Bar and the law firm of Samuels, Yolen Cantor, LLP for sponsoring today's forum. Please join me in showing our appreciation to everyone who has made this event possible. Today, we welcome the top jurist on the highest court in Oregon. For more than a decade, Martha Walters has served on Oregon's Supreme Court. In 2018, she was selected by her peers to become Oregon's Chief Justice, the first woman to serve in that role. She presides over a court of 7 elected members, 5 of whom are women. She is responsible not only for administration of the state Supreme Court, but she is also the Chief Executive Officer of the Oregon Judicial Department and supervisor of all Oregon's court and related activities. Chief Justice Walters' career spans more than 40 years, from practicing employment and civil rights law in Eugene to serving on many committees, commissions, task forces, and boards, as well as the bench. Now, as the leader of the Oregon Supreme Court, Chief Justice Walters, as she recently told the Oregonian, is focused on the goal of ensuring that all Oregonians have access to a fair and impartial justice system. Today, we'll learn a little bit more about her job and about her rise in Oregon's legal community and about what she thinks Oregon needs to do to protect and improve our justice system. Here to help us dig into some of these questions is Chris Costantino. In her practice, she is a family law specialist and a partner at Samuels, Yolen Cantor, and she is currently the president of the Oregon State Bar. Please join me in welcoming our guests.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me to this first Forum on Aging. Really, I am happy to be here. We have a city club in Eugene where I live, and I was able to be there earlier this year. And I really think City Club is one of the most important organizations we can have, gathering diverse people from looking at all of our issues from all different standpoints. It's just really terrific, and I'm really glad to get the chance to talk to you today. As you heard, I have this new job of Chief Justice, which is really very different than my job as an Associate Justice on the Oregon Supreme Court. In that job, I do preside over the Oregon Supreme Court, and I still participate in the decision-making there. And it's really very interesting work. The 7 justices on our court consider things, a whole gamut of issues come before us. Things such as, does this ballot title that the Attorney General has drafted accurately describe the subject matter of a measure? Or is this lengthy sentence imposed upon a juvenile constitutional because the person on whom the sentence was imposed was a juvenile at the time of the crime? Or does this young boy who has a genetic disability have a claim against his brother's doctor who failed to timely diagnose the same genetic disability in his brother? So these are all the kinds of things that we take up as a court, and it's fascinating to think about the Constitution and the statutes, and I like that work. But in this new job of being the Chief Justice as the administrative head of our courts, we have 36 counties with trial courts, 27 judicial districts, because some of our counties are small and so they come together as a whole judicial district. We have approximately 200 judges, 1,500 employees, and I'm responsible for that system of justice. And what I have learned as I've taken on this job is that the people who are out in our trial courts do the most important work in our justice system. And in my new job, I can go back to being what I was as a lawyer, which was an advocate. And when you're a judge, you have to be the neutral, you have to be in between. But now, as an advocate, I can advocate for the courts. I can say, you cannot believe the work that our courts are doing, and talk to people passionately about one side of an issue. It's really fun to be back in that position again. So I wanted to, I know a lot of you already have a lot of familiarity with the courts, but even though I worked in the court system for 30 years, you get kind of narrow, you get in the field that you work in. And so to me, the breadth of what our trial courts do is just really interesting. I thought I'd take a few minutes to tell you a little bit about that. First of all, we have criminal law type cases, and I call those cases in which there's been a law violation. Well, that is a system in which we hold people accountable for violating the law. Not just the criminal law, but we've got administrative laws, environmental regulations, fish and game regulations, and the whole gamut of those come into our courts. In Multnomah alone, it's 270,000 parking tickets, 218,000 violations, and 26,000 felonies in a year. So what does it take to hold people accountable? Well, there are sometimes trials, and that's what we think of courts as doing, but there is so much more. For instance, the judges have to decide whether to issue a warrant. So they have to be on warrant duty all night long. On the weekends, judges are on warrant duty. Then when someone has been arrested, they have to either set bail or consider alternatives to bail. And you know what a huge subject this is. How can we assess risk in our community and decide whether people should be held in jail pending a trial when we don't even know if they're guilty yet? Then some people who come before the court may have mental illness. Are they sufficiently able to aid and assist their lawyers or aid and assist in the defense of their case? Sometimes judges have to weigh in on that. Should they be held for, should they be sent for an evaluation of their mental health? If they're sent for that evaluation, should they be required to take medication in order to become able to aid and assist? These are very difficult issues, we need to have mental health facilities that can help us determine some of this. And you'll see throughout my talking today how interrelated all the things are that are happening in our courts, what's happening in our state. Mental health issues impact our court. What's happening in our court impacts our mental health community. Our courts, our judges have to decide really difficult pretrial motions that may make a difference in whether a case goes forward. For instance, should a confession be allowed to be considered by the jury? Was it voluntary? Then the judge will preside over all the motions at trial and decide on the jury instructions, decide how the law works. And then after the trial, if the defendant is convicted, how to impose a sentence. What kind of sentence should be imposed? Should there be incarceration? What alternatives do we have to incarceration? And when you learn about what our courts are thinking about, they've really been working hard on these alternatives to incarceration. We have what are called problem-solving courts. You may have heard of drug courts, mental health courts, veterans courts. These are all courts where we take people who are in the criminal justice system because of difficulties, trauma that they've experienced, and the courts are working again with partners in the community to figure out what can we do for these people so that they will be successful, so that when they pay their due, They will come out and be able to be community members, be able to be our neighbors, and the incredible work that it takes to make sure that these people, people that are in those courts have to agree to be getting their education. They have to have a job. They have to be paying their child support. They have to be giving back and paying their restitution. They have to be showing every single week when they report to court that they're online to becoming responsible citizens, and it making a huge difference. It takes a whole lot of time and focus on each individual person, but it works. I just want you to think about what it would be like to be a judge in a situation like this one that a friend of mine who's a trial court judge told me about. You've got a person who's been convicted of identity theft. She's clearly done the crime. She's done the crime many times before. This isn't her first time. She's been addicted. Now she's dealing with her addiction. She's in treatment. She's got a child. The juvenile court and the DHS says she's doing everything right. She's finally getting what she needs. She's finally taking care of that child. Well, then the judge looks, can I put her in drug court? And that way I can help her. This will be how, I'm not going to send her to jail. I'm going to let her be able to do these things that she has to do to become responsible. Oh, but the statutes say that there is a mandatory prison sentence for this kind of person who's in this kind of box. If I can't downwardly depart from that, I can't use drug court. What happens to her child? She doesn't have family to take care of this child, so this child is in foster care with non-family members. Every day, judges are facing dilemmas like that, trying to figure out what they can do for people, coming up with things that they can do sometimes and things that they can't do sometimes. And now what's going to happen to this child raised in non-family foster care? Our courts look very hard at protecting victims' rights. We have certain proceedings where victims need to be included in those proceedings, and after the proceedings are over, we have to, by Constitution, award restitution. So we have to have hearings on what are the damages that happened to that crime victim. What can we do to try to make that crime victim whole? And there's very many questions about what the correct measure of that restitution is. And then we have to try to collect it. And it's a lot more, this job, than just deciding, as the person in front of me, what are the facts in the case. When the court imposes fines and fees, the court has to think, am I imposing fines and fees that will present an obstacle to later re-entry into the system? If people have their fines and fees are too high built up, and then they're going to spend their whole lives having to pay those back and not be able to ever get on their feet. There's certain things we can do about that and certain things we can't. But we're part of this system that's partly been created for us and partly something that we have a say in how it should work. So that's the criminal justice system. Then we have the civil justice system, and you can think of those cases as economic cases. We decide civil disputes of all kinds. That's where the small claims courts are. That's where the landlord-tenant cases are, and that's where the multi-million-dollar business disputes are decided. Insurance disputes, employment disputes. We need judges who have expertise to be able to understand the terms of a commercial lease, as well as to understand the everyday concerns of tenants. In Multnomah County, there are, in a year, 84,000 approximately civil claims and 54,000 small claims. And each of those claims matters as much to the litigants, no matter how big or how small in dollar terms. So our judges, again, they will go to trial on those cases, but they also will help the litigants trying to see if they can mediate their cases, settle their cases. They'll be involved in disputes about what people can find out before the case gets to trial. It's called discovery. Those disputes can be very very important, because if one party is seeking every email that's ever been written over a 10-year period, that can be expensive, and it can take away from getting to the real nub of the issue. At the same time, it possibly could discover very important evidence. So judges have to say what's reasonable, what's fair, and rule on those issues. The judges also have to be concerned with access to justice. Should they waive the filing fees so that the people can come into court? What kind of mentoring can they do with law students or other volunteers so that they can help in court? What the new judges we're having turnover in our courts, and 1/3 of all our judges have only been on the bench less than 5 years. So there's a lot of mentoring that needs to happen, a lot of teaching that needs to happen, as well as just deciding cases. But what people need most of all in these civil cases is to have a timely decision. Business can't operate if it doesn't know where it stands. And the same with anybody that's got a contract dispute or an employment dispute. They need an answer. And our courts need to give that answer in a timely way, and our judges are concerned about that. And one thing that we run up against, I know I'm taking a lot of our time, I'm going to go quickly, it's our family law disputes. In Multnomah, that's 44,000 domestic relations cases. And the real challenge here is that in over 80% of our cases, one party or out of the two is not represented by a lawyer. So we have a lot of unrepresented people coming to us with very difficult problems. We have people who are with mental illness coming. We have people who don't speak English. We have interpreters in our courts that are able to interpret 278 distinct languages. But can you imagine, my friend who is a judge was telling me about this situation where she's got 2 unrepresented people in front of her. One only speaks Spanish. They've had 9 disputes since the original decree was entered. She's trying to make sure they understand what they're supposed to do. They can't write down, you can't send it out for a lawyer to write down the result that the judge has come up with. So during her lunch hour, she's got to write it all down, but then she's thinking, well, they're not going to be able to read it. So she has to have them come into court the next day so she can have an interpreter there to read it in Spanish. Then she's thinking, well, don't they need it written in Spanish because they're going to have to consult it? There's nobody we've got that can do that, available to do that. We've got judges that have to think about the everyday person and try to do what they can to make it that the world will work for them, and it's really hard. So we have some family court facilitators who are not judges to try to help people navigate that system, but the lines are out the door and people get discouraged. They sign up for a time and then their lunch hour is over and they have to go back and they never do get that help. It's astounding and amazing, everything we do. 750,000 cases filed in our courts in a year, and our judges and the staff are working like the little engine that could to get that train up the mountain. It's important what we do for our communities, and I'm very proud of our courts and glad to be their advocate.
Okay, so for our radio audience, this is the City Club of Portland's Friday Forum. I'm Chris Costantino, president of the Oregon State Bar, and I'm here today with Chief Justice of our Oregon Supreme Court, Martha Walters. So, having said all that, I'm going to take you back a time when you were a young lawyer, and you went to the University of Oregon Law School and graduated in 1977. And talk to us a little bit about those early years and where you spent your time and the type of cases you worked on as a young lawyer.
Yeah. Well, it was really fun, those first few years. Everybody thinks back to the beginning of things. I was lucky to be in a general civil practice, so I had mentors who helped me I did some business law. We represented a farmer whose polled Hereford, the semen had been stolen, and what was the value of the polled Hereford semen? All just sorts of, you just love these cases that you work on in the very beginning of time. I represented a couple little cities. I represented the city of Drain and tried to figure out how big the sewer pipes should be. At the same time, the city got involved in litigation because it got a bill for $7 million for its part of the Whoops nuclear power plants that had never operated, and so they got a bill for building something that had never produced any electricity, and the question was, is that constitutional? And I got to argue a case in front of the Oregon Supreme Court about that. And then in those days, there really wasn't the field of employment law that we have now. I represented the city of Eugene, and there was a question whether an employee could even be disciplined for what we now call sexual harassment, because it didn't even have a name at that time. That's how old I am.
So the employment discrimination work you did was pretty significant as a young lawyer. And did that shape at all your view of the justice system?
Yeah, it really did, Chris. Just in terms of, like you say, access to justice and how important it really is that people have an opportunity to come before a court and be considered, heard. It's amazing that somebody can file a case and say, this is not right, what happened to me, and be taken seriously and listened to. And we're a unique system that we have that opportunity.
So in terms of access to justice here in Oregon, how are we doing so far in 2019? What are your thoughts about that?
Well, they're not great. On the civil arena, because in criminal cases, there's a right to counsel. In civil cases, there's not, and we are only providing for 15% of the civil legal needs of the poor. That is not good. And you've had some experience with this as well. What is
Sure.
the bar doing here?
So, and the bar's doing a lot. The bar's always doing a lot. But what some kind of stats I've learned this year as bar president is, you spend a lot of time reading all this stuff and working and trying to gather people together to help face this crisis. So in 2000, we did a civil legal needs study, and the stats were the same. We were meeting, the amount of legal aid we have here in the state was meeting 15% of the need. So 19 years later, we do another civil legal needs study, and we're meeting 15% of the need. And you think, my gosh, that's 20 years practically. One of the answers is the population of Oregonians who need the services has doubled. So because we were sitting around thinking, we do a lot of work. Like, what is happening? Like, we all know the time that we spend. So why is that happening? It's the population. We have 800,000 Oregonians who qualify for legal aid, and we were able to serve something like 28,000 of that 800,000 last year. So, so there's more work to do, guys. And it impacts our courts
That's
because
what I was going to say. If I could just jump in.
I wish you would.
That they just, the people. It's not that the people don't come to court. They just come to court without lawyers. And you can imagine, take somebody who's going to try to dissolve their marriage. We're going to try to figure out the custody of their children, a parenting plan. Could you imagine if you spoke Vietnamese, you come into the courthouse, you need a restraining order, where, you know what the Multnomah County Court looks like when you walk in? There's a big staircase. There's nothing that tells you how to go get a restraining order. Who's gonna tell these people? They don't have a legal aid lawyer. Now, who's gonna tell them how to navigate that system? Who's gonna tell them? Can you imagine how scared you would be you have been probably to go before a court and try to present your case by yourself? You don't even speak the language, and you don't have a vaguest idea what even the judge wants to hear. What are the factors that matter? You don't know that. So who does that fall on? It's not as if they don't come to court. It falls on our staff and it falls on our judges. And this is not bad. We want to help everybody, but it just takes time.
Well, and the other thing too is, so you're looking at 80%. In 2016, we did another study. We do a lot of studies. And in 2016, the number of civil cases, not criminal cases, civil cases in Multnomah County and across the state, 80% of those cases had at least one person who was not represented. Now, I practice family law, and I am often among the 20% of those cases where there actually are two lawyers on each side of the case. And every time I walk into a court on a case like that, the judge just breathes a sigh of relief because I've got two lawyers on this case, and they're going to help finagle. We're going to be able to be efficient and get the case done. But 80% of the other family law cases do not have that ability to have two lawyers on the case, and it's a problem.
Chris, have you found that it's important to be able to get cases decided in a timely manner?
Absolutely. So, every county is a little different, and they all have different kind of local rules in terms of procedure and how you get to a judge. But oftentimes, I'm counseling my clients saying, we might get a judge. We won't know till 4 o'clock before our day tomorrow, so sit tight and we'll see. And oftentimes, we'll find out that there's just not a judge available. The courts are facing staff that has been cut. I think we're 12.5% fewer staff members since 2009. And so we've been working in this kind of what I'm calling shoestring staff just to meet the needs, but they're huge and they're growing. And so how do you advise your client and say, we're going to get pushed another 60 or 90 days out? Well, in family law, that's a whole new set of spending, kid issues, debt issues, all sorts of issues. And then the lawyers are spending more time prepping the case, you're charging the client more, and so all of a sudden you start going, gosh, how does the client get justice? So it is a problem. It's a problem.
Yeah, I know. I haven't told you that one of my new jobs as an advocate is going over to the legislature to obtain funding for our branch. And we're one of 3 branches of government, but we receive less than 3% of the general fund. So you would think 1 out of 3, maybe they get 30%. No, less than 3. And everything that I told you about that we're trying to do for the community, we're doing with less than 3% of the general fund. So I go there and it's my job to advocate and say, we need more resources. And these are the kinds of things that I try to tell them. I said, we got a letter from a woman whose daughter was killed in a car accident. She was 9 months pregnant and the baby lived. The grandmother was willing to step in and take custody of that child, but another grandfather also wanted custody, so there was a custody dispute. It got set for trial. The mother had to go through all the emotional heartbreak of reliving everything that had happened and think about what was best for that grandchild. And on the day before the trial, 3 o'clock the day before the trial, postponed 5 months. 5 months for that family to be at odds. The family never was able to come back together because the fighting continued for too long. So that's the human side of it. And then there's the whole economic side of it that Chris has described. It's not right.
So we're in full session with the legislature this year, so that's probably what's been keeping you a little busy. And in terms of, the bar and the court, we partner together pretty well.
Yes.
And you and I have been doing pretty good this year together.
Yeah.
And so part of the way the bar functions with the court is we have been participating in a citizens campaign for court funding. And basically, the chief asked the bar if we could get help with this. And this has been going on for a long time, not just this year. And it's a great group of from the nonprofit sector, business sector, working with the Oregon State Bar and working with our court to talk to our legislators to express how important this funding is. So Chief, if you could explain to people what it is you're hoping to get this year, and like what is the need that the courts are having this year?
Well, as Chris said, our funding is down 12.5%. For our staffing is down 12.5% from where it was at the time of the recession. We took a big cut then, and we've just never gotten it back again. So last biennium, the legislature authorized 80 positions that it didn't fund. So we're asking that we be funded for those 80 positions and that our current service level of funding be recognized and that we be provided revenue for that current service level funding, just the minimum. And we're concerned that we haven't been told that we will get that, even that current service level funding, that there still could be cuts rather than restoration of that funding. Then we really need positions on top of that. And this is for staffing. Can I just talk for a second about that?
I think you're going to answer the next question.
In Multnomah, your courts are not able to be open to the public all business hours of every day. The phone lines are only available 5 hours a day, and the public service counters close at 4. And that's because we don't have enough staff to do everything that has to be done behind the scenes. And when people aren't at those counters, they can't greet those people that come in that need direction and help in figuring out what to do with their cases. So that's why we make staffing our #1 priority.
And if you don't get the funding, if you don't get the funding, you don't get the staff, but what happens to those treatment courts? I mean, is there minimum funding there, or do they close down?
Well,
or?
a lot of the treatment courts we get grant funding for anyway. We can't close down the things that work. What will happen and what's been happening is just going to take longer for us to do everything that we do, or shorter times on what we do. So, the judges have told me they're trying to talk to somebody who's upset. She comes in, she says, I want to dismiss this restraining order that I got 2 weeks ago. I have nobody to take care of my baby except for the abuser, my ex-boyfriend, but I have nothing else I can do. I've got to dismiss this restraining order. And there's a line of people going out the door that also want something from this judge, and then the judge 10 minutes later has a trial set on her docket. But she looks at this woman and she looks at the restraining order and she says, well, when you came in to get that restraining order, you said that you had been beaten up and hit in the face in front of the child. Well, she says, I know, but this is all I can think of to do. And so the judge says, well, have you gone down to victims assistance? They have ways of helping you figure out some alternatives. Have you tried that yet? Well, I don't know. Well, here are the kind of things that you can do. Now, meanwhile, the line is getting longer. People are waiting. But if that judge didn't talk to that woman and just signed it, where would we be? It takes time to pay attention to the people that come before us. And can I talk about this one more thing about time?
You can do anything you like.
Here's what I want to say about something that's not measurable in money, and it's people's trust and confidence in the courts. There's going to be things that government does or that happen to people that is objectionable. If people have a place to go where they can contest it, this tax bill isn't fair, this contractor did the wrong thing, this happened to me where somebody didn't fulfill their agreement, then they feel like there's a system of justice that's available to them. And if when they go there, there's a judge who will really listen, look them in the eye, give them an impartial ruling, then they have faith and confidence in the whole system of justice. If they don't think that they can use a system of justice, if they think it's not for them, then where do they go? And how do disputes get resolved? So that's what worries me the most. This system that we've got that's so wonderful is also fragile. And I'm worried that we're taking a risk with it.
So, shift gears a little. You are our first female Chief Justice of the Oregon Supreme Court, but you've had other firsts. You were one of the first all-women law firms in Oregon's history, and you were the first female president for the Uniform Law Commission, which is a national organization and quite impressive. So are these, and you've talked about diversity on the court. Talk to us a little bit about, is diversity important? I know that's a loaded question. We know it is. But talk to us a little bit about your thoughts and feelings about the diversity on the court.
It really has made a huge difference. When I argued that case before the court that I told you about that was for the city of Drain, there was a woman justice on the court. The first woman to join the Oregon Supreme Court was in 1982, Betty Roberts. And she was a great mentor to so many of us. But the fact that she was up there and I could see her, if you can see somebody who's like you in some way, and there's just so many ways that you can look at diversity. I'm really glad to have Chris Garrett, the newest justice on our court. He was a legislator, so he brings that experience that none of us had. There's all different ways to look at it, but if we reflect the community, then again, people have trust and confidence in us in a way that they don't if we're not reflective of the whole.
So we've talked a lot about the courts. What can the public do? Is there anything the public can do to help keep our courts open and accessible?
Well, you're great. The bar really has been fabulous.
That wasn't the.
Yes.
But I like how you did
yes,
that.
Yes,
That was good. I like
they really
that.
have. And this citizens campaign for the courts has been huge. I've gone to Bend, I've gone down to Medford, I've gone to Coos Bay, I've come up to Portland and met with the nonprofits, with the business community. And there is this large group of people supporting the courts. If you would be willing to be part of that citizens campaign, it would be terrific. Just you probably know what to tell them.
Yeah, and that's excellent, and thank you for mentioning that. But what I was also thinking is in terms of, business, right? You talked about how important courts are to our business community, and, would it be helpful for our members of our business community to just call their legislators? Right? I mean,
that is a great suggestion.
Is that something? I mean, people could go straight, right to the source. Also, the bar is absolutely happy to do all of that work for anybody who wants to join the Citizens Campaign for Court Funding. But if you don't have time to do that, and you have time to think about who your local legislator is, would that be helpful?
That would be helpful, not just only people in the business community, but just people who know their legislators, people who are active in the nonprofit realm, just letting the legislators know how important the courts are to the fundamental operation of our democracy. It can't be overstated, and any help you can give us would be so appreciated. It really would. It really would. And can I ask you a question?
I wish you would.
You've been talking about this Oregon State Bar.
Yeah.
Like, what? It's a bunch of lawyers going to nightclubs?
They wish.
No, but what does that mean, the bar, the Oregon State Bar?
You want me to tell you where the story of the bar came from?
Yeah, I do.
I love this. So, and in fact, we were at the swearing in yesterday for our the law grads who took the February bar. We swore them in and moved them into our bar yesterday. and Justice Garrett told this story, which I have heard before, but I want to give him a little credit because I know this is getting taped. So the bar is a physical bar in the courtroom, and no one but the judge and those people who are admitted to the practice of law can actually cross the bar. And so that's where the story of the bar comes from. And so the public stays on one side, and the officers of the court and the judge, of course, cross the bar. Now, my layman's interpretation of why we call the bar is because we are association of those officers of the court. And the Oregon Bar Association's been around since 1937, Helen? 1935. I get that confused. My law firm's been around since 1927, and so I get that confused. But, so we're a unified bar, and we are, everyone who practices law in Oregon needs to be a member of our bar, and we regulate you. We make sure you're knowing the law. We make sure you're following the rules and being ethical. And we are trying to increase access to justice for the public. What a lot of people may not understand is part of our mission in being lawyers, being lawyers is a privilege, and we owe a duty to the public. And so the Oregon State Bar works enormously well, and it's a constant charge to try to improve and increase access to justice for the public and protect the public. So.
And the bar does so much volunteer work.
Yes.
And can you tell them the kinds of things that lawyers are doing?
I could. So, so the bar has some of their more popular programs you may be aware of is we do pro bono work. We have a lawyer referral service, which this might blow your mind. It blows my mind. We field 80,000 calls a year into our lawyer referral service. And when we started that program, we just wanted it to be a break even, but we're actually making a little bit of money on that program, and the Board of Governors this year voted to take those profits and put it into access to justice programs for online public videos, and we actually are doing a landlord-tenant app, which is pretty cool. So the other thing is modernizing the bar, too. We're constantly trying to modernize the bar. And so we have a modest means program. We have continuing legal education, where we have sections that people become members in, and there's all sorts of volunteer work that we do through our sections. So countless opportunities for volunteering at the Oregon State Bar.
Thank you for all you do.
Well, thank you for all you do. So.
Can I just say one more? I know you've got to give you a reminder.
I do, but you go.
No, go ahead.
No, you go.
I just wanted to say that just your being here is really important. And one of the cases that I did as a lawyer was for a person with disability, and I learned about this man who was an advocate for the Americans with Disabilities Act. And he said to think about it this way when he was looking out at the stars: we're all a part of the vastness of the cosmos, an infinitesimal part, but a part nonetheless. And that is what we can do, to be a part. And that is what you do, and I'm just very glad to be a part of it with you. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for being here. Okay. So for our radio audience, this is the City Club of Portland's Friday Forum. I'm Chris Costantino, president of the Oregon State Bar. I'm here with Chief Justice Martha Walters, and I think we're going to go to the audience now to field some questions. I also need to say that everybody watching or listening today is welcome to ask a question. If you've written a question on an index card, hold it high for the City Club staff to collect. You may also submit questions via Twitter using #FridayForum. And to the City Club members who would like to ask a question at the microphone, please identify yourself as a member and ask, and this is in bold and in all caps, ask one question in 30 seconds or less. So.
Wynn Wakala, City Club member. Recently there was a case, Michelle Largay, I don't know her maiden name, but she had been put in prison for killing a woman accidentally. She was being prostituted and she just couldn't stand to do it anymore, and she broke into a home and accidentally killed the woman. And she did get let out she was sentenced to life. She was 15 years old at the time. Anyway, they did finally let her out. The family had kind of a fit, but I was glad they did. Is there anything you can do as a judge when you see a girl coming forward who might be stealing or doing drugs and wondering if they're actually being controlled by someone else? Is there anything you can do about that?
Yes, Martha Walters, not a city club member of the city club. The human trafficking is a huge problem. We have specific laws in Oregon, and we do a lot of educating so that judges, when they're listening to cases, can try to ferret out whether that might be something that's happening in the case and get the people to services. So it's an important part of our ability to listen. Thank you for raising that.
Thank you so much for doing that.
Thank you.
Yay.
Hello, Carolyn Harris Crown, City Club member, a member of our Board of Governors. Thank you for being here on the Friday before Memorial Day weekend. So I'll give you a fun question. I was at Cleveland High School last night. We've got a bunch of seniors getting ready to graduate who are wondering where they're going to go in their lives, and their parents may be wondering the same thing. Looking back, if you hadn't pursued law and gone on the path that led you to where you are now, what else might you have done?
Oh, that's a great question, because I didn't pursue law. What I pursued was child education. I thought that the adults they had not done the right thing. So I went into daycare. I worked at a daycare center. I thought if we can do something good for the kids, that's where it's going to be. I started then thinking about systemic change and how I could learn about things from another aspect, and that's when I went into the law. But I loved working for the kids and being a teacher for the kids. It was really neat.
I'm Debbie Kay, City Club member. Thank you so much for being here today. I've learned a lot. My question is about how we get judges. We elect the vast majority of our judges. Incumbents have some of the advantages of incumbency. Challengers are usually unknown. Do you find that this is the best way to have the best judges? Would you recommend appointment or some other method of getting the best judges?
This is another really, all these have been great questions. Most of our judges come to the bench by appointment originally. There's usually a vacancy, and the governor appoints to that vacancy. It's really a good way in that the governor can look into the backgrounds of the people being put on the bench and try to create diversity on that bench, so that if there's a particular court where they have a lot of people who were family law practitioners before they went on the bench, and they need someone who's done that complex civil litigation, they might be able to add that person to the bench, or try to do some racial diversity that needs to happen. So in a way, having a governor do those appointments can be very good for the bench. I guess the question is, the people might want to have a say if they think that they've got a better idea. And so our judges, after they're appointed, have to run in the very next general election. And so, but they're usually running unopposed. So there could be more opportunities for where there's two people running. The problem is it's very hard for the public to really know how to gauge who's going to be a good judge, because you're looking at temperament, you're looking at experience, and they can't campaign on the kind of issues that politicians campaign on. So it's really difficult to try to figure out how to involve the public in a way that's helpful. It's a hard issue.
Okay, I've got a question here. Can I ask that now? Or okay, I'm looking at my people telling me yes. All right, Chief. Do you see a role for the Judicial Department to help solve the homeless problem?
Oh, that's a good question. Do I see a role for the Judicial Department in solving the homeless problem? I'm married to a legal aid lawyer who has had housing as his issue for as long as I've been a lawyer. And it's not an easily solvable problem in terms of having enough housing for people. On the other hand, not on the other hand, what the courts can do around that issue is we see people in landlord-tenant cases, and we can help mediate disputes so that maybe a person won't be evicted until there's another place for them to go. We can be helpful in that regard. We can be helpful in these problem-solving courts, in finding housing for people that are out on the streets and committing crimes. We can knock on doors, make calls, try to find resources for people. But in terms of getting the housing built, which is one of the big things that has to happen, that's really more for the legislature and the private sector.
Hi, Roberta Palmer, a City Club member. Along those lines, it sounds like you're having to do a lot of social work. So if there were less poverty in Oregon where people could get help at an early age, wouldn't your life be a lot easier?
You're right that poverty is a big problem, and what it seems to me as I've been really thinking about this is it's trauma. So many of the problems that we face as a state, if you dig back and back, poverty, addiction, abuse, even difficulties in school can be traced back to trauma, and the courts really can be helpful in trying to prevent the trauma, in trying to make sure that it's treated, and then in finding remedies for it. So unless we can really go back and deal with that initial trauma that's in so many people's lives, I don't think we're going to get there. But I think we can, and I think we're starting to realize it, and I think we're making progress. I think we're working together as a state to try to take these things on. I'm glad you raised that.
So, Chief, this is kind of a follow-up to that, and I'll just, how much training in mental health issues do judges have?
Whoa, this is another really good question. How much training in mental health issues? So not very much. And one of the big problems of our courts being underfunded is that we're not able to do any of the kind of training that we really need to do for judges. They need all sorts of training in complex business disputes, in mental health, and we're going to have a conference in October. Every year we have a one-day training conference for all the judges in Oregon, and I think that mental health issues will be the focus of that. We just don't have enough time and money to do the training we need to do. It's hugely important.
Go ahead.
Ted Kay, City Club member, you've laid out how the demand for court services is being swamped. The supply of court services is being swamped by the demand for them. And you've made the case, all of your case is to increase the supply of court services. Now, I know that when the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, and I'm in a room full of carpenters. But what about working on reducing the demand for court services through things like arbitration, mediation, ombudsman, other interventions in our society? Thoughts on that, please?
Yes, so the question about what do we do, are there alternatives to trial? And it's very important that we look at those, and we have. Less than 5% of the cases that are filed in our courts actually go to trial. The rest are resolved through agreement, through mediation, and our judges are involved in doing these mediation services. So yes, when we have community mediation where people can mediate before they even come into court, and we're involved in supporting that. We're also looking at one of the ideas, we're going to have a strategic planning effort this summer, our courts are, and one of the things I hope we're going to look at is possibly online dispute resolution. There are states that have tried that, and where people just, maybe they do it by themselves. online and see if they can resolve their disputes. If they can't, then they can maybe get somebody who's available online to help them, but be able to do it at night and on the weekends. It's something that may work. So we have to keep looking at all of this, and very good suggestion.
Go ahead, Elisa.
Hi, Elisa DeZono, City Club member. Justice Walters, you talked about the variety of languages that are spoken in our courthouses, and as an attorney and as a person who sits pro tem in one of our courthouses, and as a granddaughter and great-granddaughter of immigrants, how do we keep our courthouses safe for people of color so that they feel like they can come to court and resolve disputes without having fear of being picked up by immigration and customs enforcement? Even when they're citizens, we've had situations where people have been picked up for mistaken identity.
Yes. Mrs. Ono raises a really important issue. Our courts are open, and there are instances in which there have been arrests made at the courthouses or around the courthouses, and it can be very scary for people. We have an understanding with immigration officials that they will not go to places that are civil only, so that people can go get restraining orders without fear of this happening. But it's a real issue that our courts are concerned with, and we're keeping our eye on it. Thank you for raising it.
Sir, you're our last question. Go ahead.
Kurt Wavering, member. Domestic violence. What do you see as a feasible next important step in the justice system to deal with domestic violence?
I hate to say I don't know to the last question that's being asked. We have to have education. Probably is the most important, I would think. We've got judges that are very attuned to it and looking out for it and trying to provide remedies, but people have to come and get those remedies, and we have to have services available to anger management, for training to try to cope with that side of it. So do you have suggestions for us?
I think in lieu of suggestions, we will end there. Thank you so much, Kurt. Our time is up. Please join me in thanking everyone who's made this program possible, including Leslie Johnson for producing, Chief Justice Walters, and Chris Constantino for such an enjoyable conversation, and to the Oregon State Bar for sponsoring. Thank you so much.